what is retainage? The requirement to withhold a certain percentage, usually of the contract price or the value of the work, until a certain period of time. So I'm not sure how many of you know what retainage is, but in Texas, retainage is very, very big, and it's very popular, and we have to know a lot about it. The purpose of retainage is to secure payments owned by subcontractors, suppliers, providers of specially fabricated materials. So it's important to determine whether or not your state has any kind of requirements in which the general contractor must withhold a certain percentage from his subs or his suppliers, and how long it must be withheld, what the percentage is, and who must withhold it. So I'll give you an example. In Texas, we have a 10% retainage requirement that is required to be withheld on everything but state bonding projects. So the GC must withhold 10% from all of his subs. And then what happens is a lot of the subs will withhold down the line the 10%. And so what we do is there's a big difference between statutory retainage and contractual retainage. I went and looked up a lot of states, and it was surprising to see that a lot of states do not have statutory retainage. And we'll talk a little bit about it where you know what it is. But I believe that most of the states, they do have contractual retainage. And so statutory retainage is where a statute requires that a certain percentage be withheld from certain suppliers. But contractual retainage is where you agree by contract, or your clients agree by contract, that a certain percentage can be withheld from their contract, and it will be withheld for a certain period of time, and the contract kind of sets out the terms in which they agree to. Now, I've seen many, many different state contracts, and almost all of them for big construction contracts will have contractual retainage withheld. So I'm sure that y'all probably seen it too. And so it's important for y'all to understand that that is not a statutory retainage, but that it's a contractual retainage. And since it's a contractual retainage, that's where y'all come in into play. You have the right to negotiate those statutory retainages, and in fact you should be negotiating them. You should make sure that they're clear and that it's something that can be followed, and that you understand and your client understands when they should be paid. It is my belief that these retainages are withheld a lot of times not for valid reasons. And in my practice, I am seeing the 10% as an example being withheld to the very end of the project, and then all of these reasons being put forth to the subs as to why their retainage is not going to be paid to them. You know, a lot of GCs underbid their contracts in order to, receive these big contracts, and then they use the 10% that they've withheld on $1 billion contract to help with the underbid that they have done. So, I mean, if that makes sense at all, what I'm trying to say is if you underbid a contract, but that you've withheld 10% from all of your sub, there is a way to recoup your underbid. And I believe that a lot of GCs do this, and I think that if you practice in this field enough, you will see that as well. And so it's your job as an attorney to make sure that your client is not suffering, the loss for the GC. If you're dealing with $1 million contract, $100,000 isn't just anything to let go. So I just make sure that my clients are providing all of their statutory notices, their lien notices, and that they are making sure that they are providing all responses to chargebacks and man the job notices, and we're fixing to go through that at the end of the seminar. But my point to you is that these things all kind of relate together. The 10%, retainage relates to your client being able to file his lien correctly, promptly, and on time, and that will help him obtain his payment. And if he doesn't, then the least he can do is fall back on making sure he's responding to any delay notices on time, which we'll talk about as well. These things all fit together, and it's important that all of the pieces are, built and fit in correctly. So just what is the purpose of retainage funds in general? I mean, I've given you the bad side of what retainage, the purpose is for maybe your client, but what is it supposed to be used for? The purpose is to limit the owner's liability to lien claimants. That was the reason that retainage was originally why they originally came up with the process. They wanted the owners to have to, not have unlimited lien claims against them in which they had to pay. So usually the pool of retainage funds were held back, and then they are shared proportionately to all lien claimants. The preference going first to the individual artisans and mechanics, and after that they go to play all other claims. So assuming that the owner has done everything right, if your client is slow to get their claim in the mix, it is possible that the available funds could be paid out, leaving no recourse to the owner. So for instance, if there's a retainage requirement in your state, what will happen is the people that make the lien claims, they get a pro rata share of that retainage. And anybody that did not make the lien claims will not get anything against the owner. The owner's done what they're supposed to have, and they have no other responsibility against these lien claimants. So, for instance, I kind of gave you an example, like a real-life example of how we do this. All valid retainage and other mechanics liens would be added up, and they would be given a pro rata share of the whole amount of retainage. So, for example, if it's a $100,000 contract, I made this real simple with change orders. And so that means that using a 10% retainage, which is really common to find, by the owner, that means they take 10% of $100,000. That means there's only $10,000 to give out. There's 4 lien claimants. Lien claimant 1 has $2,000. Lien claimant 2 has $4,000. Lien claimant 3 has $6,000. And lien claimant 4 has $2,000. So as you can see, we're over the amount that has been retained by the owner. And that means that they will have to take a pro rata share of the $10,000 that's been retained. And as you can see the math over there, we did the pro rata share of each, and there is $4,000 more owed to these lien claimants than what the owner retained. And they just get their pro rata share, and the owner is not responsible for the additional $4,000. usually most states that do this system believe that that's a fair way of at least compensating the lien claimants for something, and getting the owner to not have responsibility for anything more than the 10%. So I have a addendum that shows what most of your states have, but you got to figure out what your state does for required retainage and see whether or not they have a system similar to this. That is on Exhibit B, or excuse me, Addendum B. Addendum B, I have a few states that kind of show what it is that various states do. I was, like I said, really surprised that a lot of states have none. But, for instance, California, in the event of a dispute, the property owner or contractor is allowed to retain 150% of the dispute amount. All amount of withheld retainage must be released by 45 days from the date of completion. So what California does is, I guess, if they get notice that there's a problem, they can withhold the entire amount of the disputed amount, and actually withhold 50% more. And they have 45 days from the date of completion to figure out who it goes to. New York has a retainage for public entity work, and that is it. And then like Louisiana has none. On Ohio, for projects other than residential projects of 1 to 3 detached dwelling houses, retainage is solely based on contract between the parties. So it's really surprising that a lot of these states have none, but I believe that a lot of these retainages are going to be contractual and not statutory, so you still probably should watch out for them and be aware that they're going to be in your contracts. And as you can see, the problem with these retainage funds is it's usually not deep enough to cover all of the potential claims. Next thing we're going to talk about is calculating the lien deadlines. There are about 3 ways that you can usually look at calculating lien deadlines. From the last day the work is performed, Oklahoma uses that kind of system. From the first day that work was performed, using a pre-notice requirement, Florida does that type of system, and from the date work was first performed, using a pre-notice requirement, Texas does that type of system. So you have to know what kind of system that your state uses and then work from there. I have another attachment, Attachment C, that we'll go through in just a few minutes. But Attachment C has a lot of the states on it. And what I did was I divided it by preliminary notice if you're the prime contractor, preliminary notice if you're the sub or the supplier, and then mechanics lien, prime contractor, mechanics lien, supplier. So basically, you look up what your state is. It doesn't have every state. And if you have issues finding your state, you can just email me and I will help look for it. And I could probably find it for you really quickly. But you look up your state and it will tell you under which which section is your deadlines for. So we'll go over it a little bit, a couple of specific ones where you can kind of get a idea on how they handle it. But, you know, each state has a different way of handling it. There's very few states that are exactly the same, which is why I did it that way, because there's no way I can tell you this state is the same as this and this and this. They just, unfortunately, can't make it that easy in life. There are a few practice hints I would tell you, though, that apply to almost all states. Make sure whether or not the mailbox rule applies in your state and whether or not it has to be recorded by the deadline. So Texas has a mailbox rule and on the notice letters, but it doesn't have a mailbox rule on the mechanics lien filings. So it makes it really, really difficult because we have to have the liens actually filed by the day in which the deadline is on there. And some counties in Texas for us are very, very slow. So if it says by the 15th, I mean, we have to pretty much make sure we send it out at least 5 days in advance. So know your mailbox rules. Do not wait until the end of the deadline. The best rule of thumb is to file it immediately upon the client's substantial completion. What I mean by that is that a lot of times you can wait, 30 days from substantial completion, and I don't suggest that you wait that long. There is so many variables about when substantial completion is and when the last deadline is to file things. And I generally don't want to get into a spitting match with someone as to when that deadline is. So my rule within my firm is to file it as soon as we know there's a problem. If we know that there's a problem, we file it. I would rather tell somebody that we filed it early, and if it's not time or, they don't have the money yet or whatever, okay, that's fine. Pay me when, you get it or whatever, but we're filing it. I would much rather say that than have to tell a client that they missed the deadline because they were waiting around. So that is something that we routinely practice within my firm, and it's always suited us well. Also, you will see when you start filing liens and doing a lot of them that you will come up with ways to try to make it easier on you. A lot of the lien deadlines and rules say that you have to send a copy to the GC or the owner within 5 days or 7 days of filing it. Well, we send it simultaneously with filing it. But usually, you'll have to look at your rule, but usually the rule says, it doesn't say you have to send them a file stamp copy of it. It just says that you have to send them a copy of the lien. So we send it at the same time as a CC to our lien. That way we're not forgetting to send it. Don't send it late. Don't, like I said, don't send it at all. So you want to do these things, as a matter of habit, where you don't forget or somehow make a mistake, because in many states, that mistake can cost you the validity of your lien. So make some office rules and habits that, help you not violate the rules and, cause mistakes.